From the Air Force News Service, this is Air Force Television News. With Staff Sergeant April Lawrence.
The dawn of the nuclear age brought with it changes in everyone's lives, and changes in the Air Force. Changes in its people and in its inventory. Changes in its mission. From bomb shelters in Pennsylvania to missile silos in Wyoming, people were suddenly aware that the United States and the Soviet Union were in a standoff that could, technically at least, eradicate both from the face of the earth. In the summer of 1955, there was another addition to the mix, a flying nuclear arsenal that would prove to the Soviets and ultimately future enemies that the United States meant business. Staff Sergeant Lee Bellinger profiles an integral member of the Air Force arsenal that still has a lot of life left.
Born in the early years of the Cold War, it was a major player in the standoff between the two superpowers.
Upon it depended the security of the U.S. and of the free world. Because the Soviet threat was worldwide, our air power had to have global range and be instantly ready to respond.
Designed as a high-altitude bomber to wield nuclear deterrence, it was an indelible image of the Cold War.
An achievement that stands as one of the most remarkable in military history.
And nearly 50 years later, it still flies and fights. Strategic Air Command gave birth to it. Now it's a senior member of Air Combat Command. It's been in every shooting war from Vietnam to the Gulf War, and it's been given another 50 years of life. A 100-year bomber. It is the B-52 Stratofortress, and to this day, it is still the backbone of the Air Force's bomber force.
Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, one of two Air Force bases in the United States where the B-52 operates. And just like their SAC predecessors, the air crews here are always training, creating an almost constant buzz of flight line activity. The roar of the jets can be heard throughout this part of Louisiana, and that's especially comforting for one local resident, retired Major General William Eubank, the man who flew the Air Force's first B-52.
It drove like a Mack truck. Big, it's heavy on the controls. It's not like the B-47 where you do fingertip flying. B-52, you actually have muscle it around.
It was General Eubank, then the commander of the bomb wing at Castle Air Force Base, who flew tail number 528711 to its new home in California in the summer of 1955.
In 1955, we had ready the B-52 Stratofortress, which we see here on snow-covered Loring Air Force Base in Maine, one of the far-flung system of SAC bases.
Delivery of the aircraft was the realization of a dream for SAC's commander, Lieutenant General Curtis LeMay. It was General LeMay who had helped foster development of the bomber, considering it vital in the standoff with the Soviet Union. The general, a veteran of the bombing campaign against Germany only a decade earlier, envisioned a shooting war not with mass bombings, but multiple attacks by individual aircraft piercing Soviet defenses. His contention, the aircraft to do that was the B-52.
Oh, he thought it was a great bomber. Must have, many as we bought.
The Air Force bought more than 700 B-52s between 1953 and 1961. And while they only served as a deterrence against the Soviets, about a decade later, they would go to war in Vietnam. An aircraft designed as a high-altitude nuclear bomber was now dropping non-nuclear bombs on Vietnam. Between 1965 and 1973, the B-52 flew more than 126,500 sorties. It was by any account one of the most feared weapons among the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong.
Release, clear to maneuver, left turn.
Now, after Vietnam, and having played a significant role in both Afghanistan and Iraq, the B-52 has continued to evolve, adapting to new missions with new technology, all the while aging well.
You know, it's like an old car. You know, time and time again, you work on it, but they stick around for a reason.
It's kind of like flying around or like driving in a 57 Chevy. It's a true classic.
There aren't nearly as many of these classics as there once was, Though there was once 700 of what is fondly called the Buff, there were fewer than 100 now, spending their senior years here at Barksdale and at Minot in North Dakota.
That's one of the neat things about this aircraft is the airframe has so much capabilities when they built it back in the 50s and early 60s that they're able to put that new equipment on it and meet whatever role that the Air Force needs.
And now the latest improvement for this warhorse, an upgrade for the bomber's aging computer system.
So we could end up dropping GPS-guided weapons on one target and immediately turn around and drop gravity weapons or dumb bombs on another target in a matter of minutes.
These changes are aimed at keeping the B-52 in the air until the year 2050. Nearly 100 years after General Eubank first took the controls of a newborn child.
So it's been a great, great bomber, and I think it's done a wonderful job, and it's sure been worth its money.
Staff Sergeant Lee Bellinger, Air Force News, Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana.
In 1992, with the creation of Air Combat Command, the B-52 became the responsibility of ACC. Air Combat Command is the primary force provider of combat air power to the nation's warfighting commands. It was formed from elements of Strategic Air Command and Tactical Air Command.